When I was younger, every year for Christmas I would drive upstate to my aunt's house along a stretch of highway. I cannot for the life of me remember the name of this road. All I know is that it runs nearby Akron, New York. However, for most of the drive, it's through rural areas with little to no towns nearby. It was the dead of night, and my groggy self had gotten off a long shift and had to drag my ass to my aunt's house since my extended family was expecting me the following morning. Near halfway through the drive, I realized I was low on gas, which irritated me. My brother told me he had filled up the day before, so either he forgot or was just straight up lying. I saw this archaic looking sign for a gas station off the next road. It wasn't an official road sign, it was just literally a pole with a slab of metal attached to it, the sign saying, "Gas, off next exit," or something along those lines. It seemed a little sketchy, but people do the same thing with fruit stands on highways, so whatever. I pulled off the next exit on this dilapidated ass country road through dense woods. The whole thing was creepy and surreal. I kept expecting Leatherface to come running out of the trees with a chainsaw. Eventually I made it up to the gas station and quickly realized it definitely hadn't been open for years. It was all rusted and the convenience store's roof was caving in. The gas pumps had been taken out as well. I pull over next to it and check my gauge. Would probably only make it another half mile before running out, so I called AAA and they said they'd send a truck over. Now I just had to play the waiting game. I left my engine on because when the headlights were off, everything was pitch black and my paranoid self wasn't going to sit next to an abandoned gas station in the middle of forest and in complete darkness. So most of the wait went, well, uneventful. Until I sensed movement around the side of the old store, where my headlights were pointed. I look up and didn't see anything, so I just looked back down at my phone. Then, over the sounds of the night, I hear someone yell to me, "Hey buddy, come here," in this demanding tone. I look up, and no joke, there's a dude standing by the old store, looking toward me, illuminated by my headlights. He looked like a run-of-the-mill homeless guy. I was spooked and figured he must have been squatting there. As I continued to watch him, I rolled down my window and yelled something like, "Yeah, what's up?" Still mentally crapping myself. I had my foot ready to floor it out of there at the first sign of trouble. "You got any change?" "No, sorry, I don't, man." I look up at him, and he has this vacant expression, as if standing there stiff. I see more movement. There are heads. I'd say at least 20 or so heads peeking around the trees beyond the man I'm talking to. I can't see them clearly, but they're definitely people. Literally just heads staring in my direction from around the trees. I see another guy beginning to walk from around the gas station, and then I turned around and just sped off. I got as far away from that place as my tank would carry me, and then updated AAA on my location. Eventually the driver came back over and filled me up, and I didn't say anything else. But after he left, I wanted to call the cops, so I called the nearest town's sheriff department. They told me they sent a trooper over and I gave them the location. When I got to my aunt's house, the trooper called me back and said whoever was out there was now gone, but they could tell a large number of people had been living there for quite a while. There were blankets, canned food, the usual things. That whole situation still freaks me out, but frankly, I can consider myself lucky I'll always have such a creepy story to tell. I'm just glad nothing bad happened to me. Most of the neighbors on our street are friendly. We look out for one another. We text, chat, and say hello when we see one another, etc. It's a very sweet feeling of a community. In the past, there had only been one household that wasn't interested in being friendly with any of us. An elderly woman, mid-70s. We'll call her Maud. And her son, who's in his mid-50s, and we'll call him Don. My partner and I attempted to wave and say hello, only to be met with cold stares. Once my dog managed to slip out of his collar and ran through their yard while Maud was getting out the mail. The glare I received from her while trying to catch the dog left me with a feeling hard to shake. You know that unexpected gut punch feeling? When you become the object of a stranger's misery and hatred? Anyways, We learned quickly to stay out of her way, and we even barely ever saw Dawn. The blinds were always closed tight. They rarely left the house, and no one ever visited. The last I saw of either of them was at the beginning of August in 2021. Dawn was getting the mail while wearing blue latex gloves. I thought it was weird, but in early October, one of our other neighbors reached out to ask if we'd seen Maude or Dawn recently. We had not. And suddenly, we were all too aware that their grass over there was 3 feet tall. The mailbox was so full that it couldn't close anymore, and papers were spilling out onto the street. Obviously, a welfare check was called. The neighbor who had put herself directly in charge of communicating with the police called shortly after the check and told us to sit down. Maude and Dawn were both dead, and had been dead for 6 to 8 weeks. It appeared to be a murder-suicide, the assumption being that he killed her. I paced the rest of the day in front of my living room windows, watching the crime scene van pull up, the officers in and out of the front door, taking breaks somberly chatting in the front yard. And then after a few hours, out came the body bags. The smell was something I'd never experienced before and will never forget again. The following weeks, I thought of how many times I'd walked by the house with my son and dog, while 2 bodies sat rotting. I stayed up for a few hours a few nights trying to find out anything I could. Nothing. No news stories, crime reports, or anything. So I dug into Maude's history. All I could find was that she'd been buried in a north field, dedicated to the unclaimed. I kept a close watch on the house, and researched the legal proceedings it would go through since there was no kin. Looking at that house had always felt cold and sad before, but now it felt dark, haunted. I became obsessed with Maude's story, with no way of getting any answers. Her house just staring back at me blankly every single day. Back in the spring, my young son and I were out catching fireflies. We would stand still, waiting for one to blink, and then run in that direction. It took us up and down the street multiple times. I know this is such a small, silly detail, but that night, I stared into Maude's yard for minutes at a time, waiting to see a firefly, and I swear not a single firefly blinked over there. I became so bothered by it that I stared longer, sure that if I stared long enough, I would see one, but nothing, complete stillness and darkness. I told my husband that I hoped someone would buy the property and just knock the house down. No one had any business living there now. Today, around a year after they died, the doors were opened and people I hadn't seen before were in and out, carrying bag after bag of what looked like junk. I texted a neighbor and asked for the intel, if he had any. He said the house and all of its belongings had been collectively sold and bought at an auction 2 weeks ago. These were the new owners, probably getting ready to flip the house. I typically don't shove myself into situations, but I just spent way too much time thinking about Maude, wondering who she was, why she was so angry, imagining what strange life her and her son had been living, and what their last moments were like. I knew I'd regret it forever if I didn't ask what was inside. So I did, and they invited me in. One step into the front porch, and more puzzle pieces fell into place. It was a hoarder home. There was barely anywhere to put my feet. Stacks on stacks of old fine china, pots and pans, vintage books and records, knickknacks, and countless boxes filled with God knows what, from the floor to the ceiling. The woman who had let me in said, "The mattress where it all happened is still here. You want to see it?" Slightly afraid that she'd think I was completely demented, but far more curious, said of course I want to see it. She led me into a bedroom, through the piles of leaning stacks of junk. She walked into a cramped small bedroom with a twin-sized bed, and then pulled the blanket back. If you've seen what decomp stains look like, then you can imagine what I saw. After processing, I asked, "So this is where Maude was found?" "I think they were both in here. I'm trying to piece it all together. I haven't even started in the other corner bedroom, but I'm hoping it'll give me some answers. I'll be here organizing and sorting over the next few days. You're welcome to join me if you'd like." I told her that I would love nothing more. So after all of these months, I'm excited to have a chance to get some answers to everything I've been wondering about. to get a sense of who Maud was, to possibly find a way to honor what seems to have been a very sad life, to maybe get some clues into why her son murdered her. Her son, who I found out shortly after seeing this house, was a deeply troubled sex offender. He was charged by the FBI for CP and soliciting a minor in 2014. I hope to do all of this without any bad energy attaching itself to me. I do keep wondering, why, if this was a murder-suicide, did the police not go into a deeper investigation? Is it because there were no kin to care? This is a relatively old story that my dad has told me a few times over the years. I myself have never been able to witness the house, through the description that I've been given by multiple men. 20-something years after seeing it, gave me a very vivid mental image. To begin with, I'd like to mention that my father is a very highly religious man. I'm a preacher's son, and he does not believe in ghosts or anything paranormal in the slightest. Nothing seems to spook him either, but he still swears up and down that he felt something unnatural that scared him, even just from mentioning the story to me on the rare occasion that he would bring it up. Back in the late 80s, himself and his friends would regularly hike over to the waterfall creek bed behind our farm and would follow the trails up until they eventually met the frontage road off the interstate. But one night, they decided to take a different route, to go around the backside of another farmer's land, mostly just to see the animals because they owned emus and other large pets that weren't common in the local area. Supposedly, after leaving the area and continuing into the woods, they managed to stumble upon what is described by all 5 men as a Blair Witch look-alike house. It was a very, very old home, and my dad claims that just looking at it gave him this ominous feeling. So of course, they all decided to go inside and check it out. Inside the house was a very vintage cottage-style home that was probably built in the late 40s or early 50s. The group was instantly met with writing and symbols in strange Latin-like languages, with a few English graffiti pieces that quoted a supposed satanic or pagan worshipping ritual, with certain pieces describing how to sacrifice a human soul to some supposedly demonic entity. My father still claims to this day that certain symbols were painted on the walls in blood, while others were clearly spray painted. And I find it easy to believe because he also worked as a firefighter for years before this happened and had a lot of experience with seeing human blood, dismembered bodies on the freeway after car accidents. Past the small living or kitchen area was a stairwell that was so small that their shoulders would physically brush the other side of the wall as they went up the stairs. It went straight and then stopped at a small landing, then turned right. So as you started up, you could not see what might be standing at the top. At the top of the stairs, a door led to a large attic-style bedroom, where actual chain and locks hung from one side of the wall, near a circular window at the end of the room, which was also completely covered in those weird symbols, as well as graffiti. And now more obvious and frightening large dried puddles of blood had been seeped into the floors and walls. Allegedly, once they were upstairs investigating the room, they swear that they heard someone moving up the stairwell behind them quickly. But when they looked back, there was nothing or no one there. Everyone essentially told me that it almost sounded like heels clacking on wood. So now completely spooked, they all rushed back down the stairs to see if someone was playing a prank on them and was hiding downstairs. Surprise, surprise, they found nothing and no new footprints in the dust and grime that differed from the ones that they left on their way in. To keep things interesting, I met with each of the guys separately to ask them about what they remembered, expecting to maybe find a crack or something to prove that maybe they were exaggerating. But when I asked them, I got the same answer from each of them with no hesitation. They all had the same details, right down to the minute that they entered the house and the minute that they left. But here's where it gets kind of strange. They left the house and for some unknown reason, decided to try to walk back from a different route, using a compass to approach from the east instead of the south. They did this test more than 10 times that night, walking from every possible route or direction, yet always came out at the front entrance of that house, even when the compass and common knowledge of the area showed that it was physically impossible to be at the south end of the house when they moved in a straight line from north, east, or west. There's probably some scientific explanation for all of it, but I haven't found one yet. These guys knew those woods literally like the back of their hand, and still do to this day. That final time the guys came back and found themselves standing at the front door of the house, they began to feel physically ill, verging on feverish, and finally decide it's time to give up, when one of them nearly faints, and as they turn to leave the man who nearly almost fainted, he looked up and points at the circular window at the front of the house on the second story. Everyone looks and immediately sees a tall female figure, hunched over, standing in the window watching them. Even though they see no features on her face, other than two large dark-colored eyes, and it sort of shuffled in place before turning and walking away, as if it was heading to the stairs at the end of the room. At sight of the figure moving, they all took off running through the woods, ending up on the side of the interstate about 3 miles from my dad's house. They eventually made it back to my dad's place, though they claim they felt as if someone were following them the entire way. And my dad's cousin gets up and gets some water from the kitchen, only to announce that he swore he saw the same figure now standing outside of the kitchen window near the edge of the woods. Thankfully, nothing came from this experience other than a collective state of absolute terror, especially when the subject is brought up to this day. They wrote off what his cousin saw as paranoia, though 5 years later, they decided to return to see if the house was still standing. It had fallen in on itself. It was nothing more than a pile of rubble, and they never went back again. I always joked with my dad, would ask him what he would do if he went back and found the house standing the same way it had been back then, trying to give him a reason to let me go and see the place for myself. But with trespassing laws being far more prevalent in today's time, it would nearly be impossible without either getting shot or going to jail, as it's not on our property. I don't know. The story itself always gives me the creeps when thinking about it, but I never considered the story to be true until I did this little mock interview with all the men. And when I say these grown men are scared to death by the story, I mean it. Seeing them get physically worked up and frightened by just telling the story really caused me to be less of a skeptic. What do you guys think? Is it possible that they were just spooked and it caused them to see things? Or is there really something out there in those woods? This story takes place about 11 years ago. I was a senior in high school at the time, but it's the single most mind-boggling thing that I've ever experienced. It's also important to note that it happened mid-December. I'm from Iowa, and the winters here get cold at night. Like if you get stuck outside, you will die kind of cold. That plus snowfall makes everything dead silent. You can hear anything and everything inside the house and even immediately outside of it. Me and my best friend were hanging out in my family's walkout basement, just having a boring winter night playing video games. We were also the only ones home. The reason it was just us is because my mother went straight from work to a bar to grab a few drinks with coworkers. So me and my friend thought it would be a good idea to break into the family wine and live a little. As we were sitting there opening up the first bottle, I hear the door to the garage open and then slam shut. I immediately go, "Oh shit," and start looking for places to hide the bottle. My friend then says, "Hey, I thought your mom was supposed to be out all night." "She was," I replied. Then I hear a few heavy stomps, and my mother yell out, "Anyone home?" I yell back up the stairs, "Yeah, just hanging out in the basement." I hear a few more steps move from the garage door toward the stairs, and then she yells out again, "Hey, can you come up here? I need your help with something. I need you up here." I reply back while frantically trying to find a good place to hide the wine bottle. "Yeah, just give me a minute, Mom." Then there was silence for about 20 seconds. "Anyone down there with you?" She yelled back in a more concerned, serious tone, in a voice that was slightly off from my mother's. This was the first thing that told me something wasn't right. Our family never cared if anyone was over, as our house was a very open house to all my family and friends. And her voice was just wrong. It sounded like my mother's, but it was missing something that I couldn't quite put my finger on. Weirded out, I reply back, "Just Colton." After I yelled that back to her, I found a good place to hide the bottle and began walking up the steps to the next level. Now, as I'm walking up the steps, I couldn't help but feel the overbearing silence of the house and the slight electric twinge. Something isn't quite right. When I got to the top of the steps, I look over to where the door to the garage is, and also the kitchen right next to it. It's black, pitch black. All the lights were off, and there was no moon shining through any windows. I walk over to the kitchen, yelling out, "Mom, where are you?" No reply, just silence and darkness. I feel the electric twinge turn into full needles, my adrenaline kicking in full force. I have to get out of here as fast as possible. My mother was not home. I run back down the stairs, grabbing my coat along the way. "What's wrong?" Colton says. "My mom's not home," I replied as fast as I could, looking for my truck keys. "What do you mean? You were just talking with her." I could see the confusion on his face. "Look, man, there's no one home. We need to leave now." I took a few steps towards the back door that opens up into the yard. I see my dog shaking on the couch and my cat growling behind it. I couldn't leave them. I just knew if we left them, something would happen. "Are we leaving?" Colton said, still confused. "No, I can't leave them here alone. Something is really off, though. I'm gonna call my mom and figure this out." I pull out my phone and call my mother. She picks up immediately. "What's going on?" she answers. "Mom, were you just home? I heard you yelling for me from the second level, and when I went up there, you weren't there," I said, hoping that she was playing some sort of joke. "No, honey, I'm just leaving the bar. I wasn't feeling very well. Are you okay? What do you mean you heard me?" I fill her in on the whole story, and she rushes home. Colton and I stayed up in the basement with the animals until she got there, but before she did, you could hear something up the stairs. Not walking or sitting on things, but a pressure in the air, like a black hole was slowly moving from one room to the next. And the word that I would instinctively describe it as is hungry. When she got home, you could feel the thing leave just as quick as it came, like an overbearing predator presence had just flown away. We've still never figured out what the hell was going on. And this is just one story of many unexplainable things that have happened to us. But this is the easiest one to write down, and the one that I was happy to have a witness to. My mother has passed away now, and I've moved to Arizona. But whenever I go back to Iowa and I see Colton, he still gets creeped out by what happened. I will truly never know what took place that night. But I know whatever it was that had my mother's voice, it was evil and hungry.